All right, before we get into this, let me say this first. If you've been hearing the headlines about a $200,000 hurricane tax break and you're thinking, okay, that sounds like help, you're not wrong to think that. But today, I just want to slow things down and look at what's really being said. And more importantly, how it actually works in real life. This is Scoping Jamaica, and on this channel, we don't rush past the details or get caught up in big words and big announcements. We take the time to understand what policies really mean for everyday people.
Into prolonged periods of uncertainty and hardship as a result of the hurricane. Damage assessments indicate multi-billion dollars economic losses across major productive sectors, including housing, public infrastructure, agriculture, tourism, and other key industries. The physical damage has been estimated at approximately $8.8 billion, making Hurricane Melissa the costliest natural disaster in Jamaica's history. Beyond physical disruption, Mr. Speaker, the hurricane severely disrupted employment, income flows, and many households' ability to meet basic needs in the immediate aftermath. Mr. Speaker, in this context of profound national disruption and personal hardship, many employers stepped forward to provide emergency financial assistance to their employees. These payments were not made as remuneration for services rendered, but as support for personal recovery, welfare, and basic survival during a period of national distress.
If you're looking for something to just play in the background while you're in the kitchen stirring oxtail, you might be on the wrong channel. But if you want somebody to actually slow it down, read between the lines, and break down what's really being said, that's what Scoping Jamaica does. All right, let's pause right here for a second. Because everything you just heard, that wasn't the policy yet. That was the setup. This is the emotional and logical runway for what comes next. And trust me, none of this is accidental.
Recognizing these extraordinary circumstances, I announced to the House of Representatives on December 9, 2025, that the government would move to establish a framework to allow the non-taxable treatment of disaster relief support provided by employers to their employees following Hurricane Melissa. That announcement, Mr. Speaker, reflected the government's clear view that the automatic application of the tax laws should not diminish humanitarian assistance provided in response to a declared disaster.
All right, this part sounds reasonable, even noble, but there's something sneaky in how it's framed. Listen to the wording carefully. When she says they're going to establish a framework, that sounds serious and responsible. But a framework isn't help by itself. It's not a payment. It's not a guarantee. It's not a right. It's just a set of rules that allows something to happen if certain conditions are met. So right away, the government isn't actually promising help. They're promising permission. Then she says non-taxable treatment. Notice what she doesn't say. She doesn't say the government will provide relief. She says they'll allow certain payments to be treated as non-taxable. That's legal language, not humanitarian language. All that means is the government is changing how something gets taxed. They're not creating new assistance. And once again, the help only happens if someone else, the employer, acts first. That brings us to the next quiet move. Support provided by employers. This is where responsibility shifts without most people noticing. It sounds like government action, but the delivery is entirely on employers. The government gets to look compassionate, but employers are the ones actually expected to put up the money. If employers don't act, the framework just sits there doing nothing. Then she talks about the automatic application of the tax laws like the law itself is the problem. Cold, rigid, heartless in an emergency. That framing makes the government look flexible and humane for stepping in. But what's really happening is not broad relief. It's a selective pause in how tax rules apply to certain payments under certain conditions. And then comes the emotional shield, humanitarian assistance. Once you hear that phrase, it feels wrong to question anything. Nobody wants to sound like they're against helping people in distress. But here's the key thing. The government isn't actually providing the humanitarian assistance. They're deciding how assistance that someone else provides will be taxed. So the language feels generous, but the action is one step removed. In plain terms, what's happening here is that two things are being blended together: humanitarian aid and tax classification. And when you blend those two, the policy feels much bigger and kinder than it really is. So when you hear this and think, okay, the government stepped in to help, you have to pause and remember. The help isn't guaranteed. It depends on employers, and it doesn't reach everyone. That's why the wording matters.
Mr. Speaker, the Income Tax Adjustment Bill, now before this Honourable House, gives legislative effect to that commitment. It converts a necessary policy response into a clear statutory framework, providing certainty to employees, employers, and the tax administration alike, while ensuring that compassion and fiscal responsibility are properly aligned in law. Mr. Speaker, this Honourable House is reminded under Section 2.1 of the Income Tax Act that emoluments are defined broadly to include salaries, wages, fees, and any other benefits arising from employment, all of which are ordinarily subject to tax. Additionally, outside of the Minister's discretionary remission powers under Section 86, which applies only where there is a considered just and equitable on a case-by-case basis, there's no standing statutory provision that allows disaster relief payments to be treated consistently as non-taxable following a declared disaster. The reliance on discretion alone, Mr. Speaker, is neither efficient nor equitable in the context of a large-scale national emergency. It creates uncertainty for employers seeking to assist their workers, inconsistency in tax treatment across similarly situated employees, and inequity for those who may receive relief only to see it partially eroded through taxation. Mr. Speaker, the bill provides that disaster-related honoraria paid by employers to employees during the period from November 1st, 2025 to March 31st, 2026 will not be treated as taxable income in the hands of employees. At the same time, the bill allows such payments to be treated as deductible expenses for employers.
The quiet imbalance. Capped workers, uncapped employers. What people hear: workers can receive up to $200,000 tax-free. That sounds like a firm limit, and it is, for the employee. What's less obvious? There is no equivalent public cap on how much a large employer can deduct in total, how many employees they can pay the aggregate reduction to their taxable profit. So while each worker is capped, the employer's total tax benefit can scale up massively. Company A has 10 employees. Max tax-free relief. Limited Company B has 5,000 employees, can deduct hundreds of millions in payments, reducing corporate tax liability at scale. Same rule. Very different outcomes.
Provided they are genuinely borne by the employer and supported by appropriate documentation. The bill, therefore, corrects an outcome that would otherwise undermine the very purpose of the relief being provided. Mr. Speaker, it is important to emphasize that this relief is carefully bounded and does not represent an open-ended exemption. The measure is deliberately limited to a defined post-disaster period and is designed to operate only in the specific context of Hurricane Melissa recovery.
First, listen to this part. Provided they are genuinely borne by the employer and supported by appropriate documentation. That sounds strict, right? Like there are strong safeguards. But here's the trick. Who decides what counts as genuinely borne and appropriate? Those words are not self-defining. They leave a lot of room for interpretation. And interpretation usually sits with the employer, the tax authority, and discretion after the fact. So it sounds tight, but it's actually flexible.
Further, the framework includes a prescribed cap to be determined by the minister, intended to strike an appropriate balance between providing meaningful support to affected workers and maintaining the principled structure of the income tax system. This approach, Mr. Speaker, minimizes revenue risk and ensures that the exemption remains proportionate in nature, duration, and fiscal impact. In addition, the Tax Administration Jamaica is empowered through prescribed record-keeping and reporting requirements to verify compliance with the relief, thereby safeguarding against abuse and ensuring transparency and accountability in its application. Mr. Speaker, the ministry is not done yet. Mr. Speaker, while this bill addresses the immediate circumstances arising from Hurricane Melissa, it is not intended to be the final word on how disaster-related employee support is treated in our tax system. Recent events have made it clear that Jamaica would benefit from a more enduring framework for managing disaster-related payments in future emergencies. It is with this thought, Madam Speaker, that the government has further amended the bill to include the permanent mechanism to allow for clearly defined disaster relief support to be treated consistently under the income tax regime, subject always to appropriate oversight.
When she says this bill isn't the final word, she's doing two things at once. Admitting this is incomplete. Opening the door to future expansion of the same approach. That sounds reasonable, but it matters because Parliament is being asked to approve a direction, not just a one-off fix. Once the principle is set, employer-based, tax treatment relief, it becomes the default model going forward. So you're not just voting on Hurricane Melissa, you're voting on a template.
Turn your mic on, please.
The amendments here aim to do three things. The first one related to the relief from employers to employees. When the minister brought it a couple of weeks ago, I indicated that we had no objection to what you were proposing. I questioned whether 200,000 was sufficient, but you said based on your own research. The question I would have, does this also allow the employer not to pay NIS, NHT, and other deductions that they would normally pay to an employee? Is the relief only for income tax, or is it the relief for all the other applicable taxes that an employer is obliged to pay to an employee? The second thing, to move the date, the filing date from March to April, it is not something that we would have an objection to. I believe it puts the government in a better position to understand the amount of taxes it would collect by the end of the fiscal year, March 30th. And as the minister said, it's something that has been recommended by both tax professionals, and the Fiscal Commissioner actually in his last report recommended it. Minister, there is one question I have which is related to section 4B, item 5. And the section reads, every person delivering a return of income shall include with the return a statement in the prescribed form or such form as may be agreed by the Commissioner General of the tax chargeable on that income under this Act, indicating how much, if any, of that tax remains unpaid, and the tax so indicated as unpaid shall be treated as if it had been the subject of a notice of assessment served on that person. I just want clarity here. Are you saying that when you file, and if you have not paid everything, and you so indicate, you will automatically be the subject of an assessment by the tax authorities? I'm just seeking clarification on that section. But the other two, as I said, we don't have objections, but I would like you to indicate whether the other taxes are, the employer will be relieved of the other taxes.
The opposition asked some good questions. I'll give them that. Especially about the taxes and how this thing actually works. But there's a lot they didn't really push on. For example, they never really asked who counts as affected. Like, does an employee have to show actual hurricane damage? Or is it just whatever the employer decides? Because if it's left that open, two people in the same company could be treated completely differently and nobody checks it. They also didn't ask how fairness works inside a workplace. Can an employer give the full amount to a few people and nothing to everyone else? Is there any rule that says this has to be applied evenly? Because if there isn't, then this relief depends more on workplace politics than need. Another big thing they didn't press is how much the employer really benefits overall. There's a clear cap on what a worker can get, but no clear cap on how much a big company can deduct in total. So the bigger the company, the bigger the tax benefit. And that wasn't really challenged. They also didn't ask about executives and owners. Can senior managers get this tax-free too? Can people at the top benefit the same way as someone on the floor who actually took hurricane damage? That's usually where these things get messy, and it wasn't addressed. And maybe the biggest thing, they never really challenged the idea that all of this relief has to go through employers. If you lost your job, or you work informally, or your employer just doesn't participate, this framework does nothing for you. They talked about clarity, which is important, but they didn't push for public reporting either. Like, will we ever see how many people actually benefit? Or how much money companies deduct in total? Without that, we're just taking it on faith. So yeah, the opposition asked how the system works on paper, but they didn't really ask who it works for, who it leaves out, and who ends up benefiting the most. And that's where the real questions are. And that's why these conversations matter. Not because anyone is against relief, but because relief has to be real, clear, and fair. Big announcements are easy. The details are where people actually feel the policy. On Scoping Jamaica, we don't rush past the language or get distracted by headlines. We slow it down, read between the lines, and ask who really benefits, who gets left out, and what it means going forward. If this breakdown helped you see something you didn't notice before, drop a comment and let me know what stood out to you. And if you think more people need to hear this kind of discussion, share it with them. This is Scoping Jamaica, where we look past the noise and focus on what actually affects everyday life. Until next time, stay informed, stay thoughtful, and don't let the details pass you by.